many are still grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective podcast, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm your host and president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating and not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone and welcome to Adopt Perspective. I'm your host and the president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. A little over a year ago, we spoke with Lisa Preston, an adoptee born in England in 1970 and adopted at just 6 weeks old into a family who already had adopted a son. When Lisa was 2, her family relocated to Australia and later welcomed a biological daughter. In that episode, Lisa shared her powerful story of reunion, one that spanned decades, crossed continents, and showcased her incredible courage, tenacity, and deep understanding that sometimes a no doesn't stay a no. Today, Lisa returns to Adopt Perspective to share the next chapter in her journey, including a recent solo trip back to the UK to spend time with her father, Richard. If you haven't already, I highly recommend listening to Lisa's first episode, which was released on the 13th of March 2024, before diving into this one. Lisa, welcome back to Adopt Perspective, and it's so lovely to have you join us again.
Hi, Jo. It's nice to see you and nice to be able to have a chat with you.
It's really great to welcome you back because you've been such a popular episode as well. We've had so many people that have contacted us just to say how much they got out of your episode and ask questions about it, and so it really has been a popular one on our podcast.
I think what you're doing, sharing people's stories, is so important. When I was going overseas on my trip to meet my birth parents for the first time, I listened to so many podcasts. And so I decided that I needed to share my story to help somebody else. And I think that's what it's all about. So I'm really happy to share the next part of my journey.
Thanks, Lisa. So I thought maybe you could start by giving us a bit of a quick recap of where things were at when we last spoke.
Last time I spoke to you, I had just returned back from the UK. It's very fortunate to meet my birth mother. Sadly, even though it was such an amazing experience, she was a once only contact. She didn't want to speak about the past. And she was very guarded in her conversations that she had with us. I also was able to, in that same trip, meet my birth father. And I have an ongoing relationship with him. And I still, 2 years on, speak to him every day. In fact, I speak to him morning and night. We text. We do FaceTime, and I send him videos and he sends me pictures and things like that. So we have a really lovely relationship. My birth mother, sadly, is stuck in the shame and the guilt of it all, and I'm a secret. And her husband of 51 years doesn't know I exist, and she just can't get it. Mm.
Thank you so much for recapping that for us. And just for you, Lisa, I'll edit this out, but my dog is just going off. I might end up having a courier come today when they should have come yesterday. So
That's all right.
I'll put my hand up and pause this, and I'll run out because they're probably going to beep and need a signature. So I apologize so much for that.
That's all right. That's all right. We like a casual chat.
Yeah. So at the end of our last conversation, you mentioned your plans to visit your father, Richard, in Scotland later in 2024. Can you tell us how that visit came about and how it all unfolded?
So I was dying to get back over there to see him because I really only saw him for a day and a half. And I was so fortunate I met him for a lunch. He invited my husband and I back to his farm, and we spent the day with him we just got on so well, and we just had an instant connection, an instant, love of each other. And I'd found out that he had had 3 heart attacks, and the last one had nearly taken him. So I was very fortunate to meet him. So I was very keen to get back, but the lag in time, because we were selling our house, and it took a long time to sell our house, and I needed to be around. So it took us 16 months to sell our house. And so we finally sold, and I moved. And so in November last year, I went over on my own to visit him. And I'd done a lot of reading about reunions. And my birth father was really upset with me and really incensed that I wasn't going to stay in his house. And but I knew all the reading that I'd done that wasn't the thing to do. That we all needed our space and time in the afternoons to gather our thoughts. And also, his wife, for the last 24 years, has been a gatekeeper. So she wasn't too excited that I was around. Like, she's been pretty good, but she's not too thrilled. So I didn't need to lump myself in on her house. So I stayed in an Airbnb 5K down the road from them. And when it came close to, towards the end of November for me to go, look, there's your dog. Um, yeah, when it came close to the time to go, and I was, thinking about packing my suitcase, that's when all the anxiety hit. I just didn't realize how anxious I felt about the trip. And I thought that I would be fine going on my own. And I did my first trip with my husband, who was just so supportive and such a calming influence. But I decided that I really needed to do this trip on my own, and that it was about me, and it was about me getting to know Richard. And I also thought it would be boring for my husband. And I just wanted to go with the flow and do whatever, each day brought. So I was going over for 2 weeks. And packing my bag, honestly, I've traveled quite a lot. I just could not my bag. I ended up just about throwing everything in a suitcase with not much thought. And then we live 3.5 hours from Sydney, and my husband drove me to the airport, and I cried all the way to Sydney. It's for a tear to think about it. And I got to the airport, and the plane was delayed, and so because it was really bad weather. So I'm sitting in the airport and crying my eyes out, and I think people were probably looking at me thinking, "Oh, that poor person, probably someone's died." But I was just so nervous and so anxious, and not knowing how I would be received and how I would cope with it all. So I actually got on the plane, and I cried all the way to London, and by the time I got off the plane, I looked like I was 100 because I'd hardly slept, and I'd cried because I was so anxious. And so my birth father, he's a farmer, and he's never really gone out on the freeway. And he's never gone to Heathrow Airport. So he wasn't able to come and pick me up. So decided that we would meet at a petrol station, which was half an hour from the airport. And there was no other way for me to get to this petrol station except to catch a taxi. So I'm in this taxi, and the guy clocked my accent, and he said, "Are you here on a holiday?" And I said, "No." And he said, what are you doing?" And I told him my story. Well, this taxi driver cried for the next half hour all the way to the petrol station, and it cost me 250 Australian dollars to get to this petrol station. And when I got to the petrol station, the taxi driver got out, and I thought he was helping me to get my suitcases out. And he said, "I've been a taxi driver for 22 years." And he said, "I had never heard a story like it." He said, "I have to give you a hug." So that was so lovely. And my birth father and his wife were waiting there for me. And it was just, it was like being wrapped in a warm hug. Yeah, it was really lovely to see. Yeah, yeah, he was so excited.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was such a big trip for him, to come all that way, and even like coming on the freeway. So I really appreciated that he'd, put himself out of his comfort zone to come and get me. Yeah, so they dropped me to my Airbnb, and I settled in, and he lent me his wife's car. His wife is 87, and she doesn't do a lot of driving anymore. So they had a spare car. So I was really lucky. And so after he dropped me at my Airbnb, and I had a shower, and then, a couple of hours later, he came and picked me up, and I went to his farm, and I spent 2 weeks with 70 and 80-year-olds, and I just had the time ever. And every day, I was going somewhere for morning tea, somewhere for lunch, somewhere for dinner. And it was so lovely to be welcomed by his friends and family. It was just amazing. Yeah, it was really special. And a week before I went over, Richard's very routine in his week, and every Thursday he goes shopping to Aldi. And he was saying to me, I met up with a lady, went to school with, and her name's Bobby. And he said, he said, she's your second cousin. She's your mother's first cousin. And I said, no way. And I said, when you see her next Thursday, I said, can you ask her when I come if she'd be prepared to have a coffee with me? And if she said yes, could you ask her to bring some photographs of her time growing up, with my birth mother? So by the time I got there, she had invited us to her farm. And so she lives in a really beautiful manor house, and we went to her place for dinner. And my birth mother and his wife came with me to the dinner. So it was a little bit hard because my birth mother, my Richard's wife, doesn't like talking about my birth mother, because Richard is really sad that he wasn't able to have an ongoing relationship with my birth mother, and he really her, and I think he still likes her all these years later.
Mhm.
So obviously his wife doesn't particularly like talking about, but I was conceived a long before she came on the. And then, but I got to look at some photographs and got to, chat a bit about my birth mother. And then a few days later, that lady rang, and she asked if I could come back for morning tea. She said, I've got another one for you to meet. And it was really nice to sit there with those two cousins, because they're that one step more emotionally removed from it. And that lady Bobby said to me, I came to see you in hospital when you were born. And
Wow.
so that was pretty wow. And she said it was so hard for me to visit you in hospital, because she said I was pregnant at the time, but she said I was married. And she said I was going to the hospital knowing that I could keep my baby,
Mm.
but my cousin couldn't. And she said she was so distressed, seeing what was going on. And she said when she left the hospital, she went straight to Richard's parents' farm where Richard was still living. He was only 23. And she knocked on the door, and Richard's mother opened the door, and she wouldn't let Bobby come into the house because she knew why Bobby was there. And Bobby said, you're going to blame anyone. She said, your mother is a victim of the time that she lived in, and that she said her mother was a devout Catholic, and Richard's mother said my son wouldn't do anything like that. And she
Yeah.
said it's the mothers that made sure that you were shipped off. And she said, because they lived in a very small village, and there was a lot of gossip, and she was an unmarried mother. So it's really sad, and it's really sad that all these years later, that my birth mother still very much carries the stigma and the shame of it. And
Mm.
I said to her when I met her, we live in a world now where there's so many different types of relationships. And I said, I'd be very surprised if people judged you. I mean, people really don't worry about those things anymore. And she said, oh no, she said, I'll never get over it.
Yeah.
So it must have been a very hard, sad and cruel time for her.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard to even really fathom just the amount of shame and guilt that would have been surrounding these young women in their small communities at that time, and just what
Absolutely.
we see it all the time, the impact that it's had on their lives all these years later.
Oh, yeah. And when I was chatting to these two cousins, they said the sad thing about all this, they said, your birth mother's husband is the loveliest man. They said he is so family orientated, and they said we feel he would have absolutely welcomed you with open arms. They said your greatest problem well, in the future, because her husband is not well and she's nursing him at the moment, and he's 10 years older than her. And they said when he dies, you may hope that she will come round, but they said your greatest problem is actually going to be her daughter, because they said her daughter, they said they're so English, they were so, awfully, frightfully posh. And they said, she's such a madam, when they actually want to say a bit more than that. They said your two half brothers are family men, and they would probably welcome you with open arms. Daughter, not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they said that might be a problem for you. So I hope my birth mother, she goes through life, that she feels, when she's gone and she doesn't have to keep the secret as much, that she might be able to see me again. I don't know.
Yeah. How does it feel when you hear something like that, that you may not be welcomed by a pocket of the family?
I have to say it doesn't stop me. I think this is just only the beginning. This is, full of lots of different chapters. And when I went over to see my birth father, a lot of people said to me, "Are you going to contact your mother?" And I said no, because she's made it perfectly clear that she doesn't want contact, and her focus is nursing her husband at the moment.
Yeah.
But who knows what will happen in the future. And I think I was telling you, I follow two of her kids on Instagram, so that gives me a window into their lives. They don't follow me back, and I don't comment on anything that they do, so I'll be able to see when he passes and see what happens. And my birth mother knows where to contact me. And if she doesn't ever contact me again, that's okay. And one day when she passes, I will make contact with my half siblings. But, I don't want to upset her while she's still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understand. So tell us some more about your time with Richard while you were there.
It was so lovely, because he was just so proud. Like, even like we'll be shopping in Aldi, and he knows the girl serving him on the checkout, and he'd say, "This is my daughter. She's come all the way from Australia to see me," and he was just so proud. And it was lovely going and visiting his family and friends, and people, talking about our likeness. Because we are so alike in our looks and our build, eyes and our hair. And it's just, for me being adopted, I just find that absolutely fascinating. And, people wanting to know the story. And some people actually were quite shocked that I had contacted him 24 years ago. And they were like, "Well, what happened? Like, why didn't you make contact? Why didn't you two get together?" And I couldn't say, because his wife was with us everywhere we went. I'm like, "Yeah, well, she was the handbrake. She wasn't going to have it. She wasn't going to have me around."
Yeah.
Mm. So it's taken a long time for things to come about. And those two cousins that I met, they listened to my first podcast that you did, and they were crying. They were just so saddened by hearing it, and felt so sad about the journey that I had to go through to meet my birth parents. And they were saying to me, "Well, why didn't you contact us? We would have driven you straight to their doors." And I said, "Because I didn't know you existed. I didn't know that you were around. Yeah, I had no idea." And they have very welcomed me into their family. And so that was such a huge part of my trip. And they just said, "We are your family and you are welcome." Yeah. And also, I could see that in my birth mother's family, she came from a more educated, more well-called family. And my birth father's family are farmers. They've never travelled. Never held passports. They've never been to university or anything like that. And my birth mother's family didn't want her to marry into that family as well. That's part of it. So I could see that it's such a British thing, that massive big class side, as
Yeah.
well. And when I was with Richard, it made me, it's like sliding doors. You just think, well, my life could have been this, but ended up in Australia, and I ended up, I can see, even though parts of my life have been very hard, and that I didn't connect with my adopted mum. I've had a very fortunate life, and I've been able to be educated. I've travelled. I have lived a more sophisticated life. Um, But the downside of my life as well is that my dad was in the Navy, my adoptive dad, and we lived in over 40 houses and I went to 16 schools. So my life was a life in my adopted family of complete disconnect, and a disconnect because I didn't really belong to that family. I didn't really. And I realized when I was over there, I've lived in a void all my life, growing up, that my life was in black and white. Um, and now, having met Richard and being able to find my identity, I can live my life in joy and I can live my life in color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
completely get that. Yeah. It's such a good
yeah,
analogy too. And I think it's from that deeper connection. I found the same thing when I connected with more family in Sydney, and I went to cemeteries, and they gave me photographs to keep, and different family memorabilia that I have scattered around my room here, all around me when I'm doing these podcasts. And it really felt like I'd taken a black and white page and I'd colored it in, and I felt connected in some way. I think sometimes just having, even if it's not with, your mother, if that connection's not ongoing, but you've got those cousins and they've welcomed you in, and
absolutely.
all of that just makes you feel a little more part of something, doesn't it?
It does. And then I, look at the life that I could have had, with Richard. And his wife has three children. She has two daughters and a son. I've never met the son because he lives further away. Daughters. And one day they rang at the farm and they said that they would like to take me out to lunch. Well, I beside myself. I was so worried and so upset. I was thinking, why would they want to take me out to lunch? They're going to ask me 20 questions, and why are you here and what do you want? And I'm thinking, here I am alone. I've got no support, but they couldn't have been more welcoming and more lovely. And they told me about their lives growing up. And it was quite interesting that Richard actually wasn't very kind to them at all. And they did, he's always hated children. And they said, we can't believe how much he is over you. And I just said, well, it's that old flesh and blood thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me.
That highlights too that sometimes when we reconnect, there's the light and there's the dark of people, isn't it? None of us are all one way or another. And so as we discover more about people, sometimes we discover things that we don't particularly like or connect with. But
Correct.
you sort of have to, like with any relationship, make decisions and around, okay, I'm going to have to overlook that part, or I'm going to.
And I did. They said, he was quite awful to us. And they said we were angry with our mother that she chose him, us. So yeah, that was really sad. And they also were saying to me, they said, our mother calls you the other woman. And I said, well, I'm not. I said, I'm the daughter. And they said she's really struggling having you here, and she's struggling having to share Richard with you. And it's not like me to say this. And I said, well, I'm sorry to say, I said, I really don't care. I said, I have spent 55 years, trying to find where I belong and trying to find myself. I said, I'm here for 2 weeks. I live across the other side of the world. And I said, she's just going to have to cope.
Yeah.
And so I knew then that I had made the right decision staying in the Airbnb.
Yeah.
And I also, that lovely book that's out at the moment by Mel Robbins, the Let Them theory.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I, really have that with me. I thought, I don't care. Let her have her feelings. And then Mel Robbins says, but let me, I'm going to enjoy my time here. I'm going to get to know this man. I'm going to get to know his family, and I'm going to enjoy my time here because he is old. He's not fantastically well. And it may be my only opportunity that I get to spend time with him.
Yeah.
And it was really lovely. And when I left, 2 days before I left to come back to Australia, all the people that I had met, and that's what I found so amazing because I have lived all over. all his family and friends live within a 5 to 10 kilometre radius around his farm, and they all see each other. And there's this constant stream of people coming through his kitchen, his big farmhouse kitchen, coming to have a cup of tea. And 2 days before I left, it was so amazing. People came to say goodbye, and they gave me presents and cards, and and they said, you've put such a spring in Richard's step. You've really changed his outlook on life, and you can see the joy in him. Yeah, so it was just, I feel blessed that I got such an amazing experience. Yeah, and I've come back and I feel very whole and very complete, and I feel at peace with it all now. So I'm planning on going. I'm back again sometime this year with my husband. So we'll go and see Richard, but we'll also go and do some travelling ourselves as well. Yeah. So I've been very fortunate how it's all turned out. With reunions, often it doesn't go well, and to be in somebody's space for 2 weeks is a big thing. And every morning, Richard would be showered and dressed and sitting in his kitchen at 7 o'clock in the morning, waiting for me to come. But some mornings, I would get up and I was staying down near some canals, and all the canal boats and were on the canal, and so I'd go for a walk in the morning along the towpaths and chat to people on people who were making coffees and chopping wood and things like that. So sometimes I wouldn't get to his house till sort of 10 o'clock in the morning, and he wouldn't be happy that, because he just wanted every second. But I needed to go for a walk and, think about things, because it's pretty big. It's heavy.
How was it when you left?
Um, Richard was really sad for 2 days before I left. He sort of went into himself.
Mm,
And I think for him, he was reflecting on the choices that he made, but he was 23 when I was conceived, not very worldly, a young man. And I think he regrets the choices that he made now. I think he feels bad about it. I've told him a bit about my life growing up, and a bit of the illness, and the disconnect and not having an identity in my life, and explaining to him that I feel that adoption is a band-aid in the moment, and it has a life ripples that go out, and it
mm,
continues to affect everyone that's concerned. And here he is at nearly 78, and he feels really sad about it. And sometimes he says to me, I just feel so hopeless about it. And he said, it's like I'm looking in a window and I see something that I really want, but I can't have. And he said, you just live so far away. And so, yeah, so he's really upset about it. He's quite distraught about it on so many levels. And
yeah,
he said to me, I hope that you will keep coming to me, while I'm alive. Yeah, because he said, you just bring me so much joy.
yeah.
Mm.
Thinking about those times too where his wife was playing the gatekeeper. It's something I've heard a fair bit, not all the time, but particularly when people are trying to reconnect with their fathers, that sometimes wives can play gatekeeper, and men often. I'm going to make lots of generalizations and stereotypes here, but men can often let their wives step forward and handle these kind of emotional things as well. I know in my own marriage, my husband is very happy for me to handle all of these kind of relationship kind of things.
Yes.
So it's interesting, I guess, for people to hear once you've broken through that, that there's still a really strong connection and relationship there. And sometimes you do just need to get past the gatekeeper.
So, yeah, I normally wouldn't be like that, so ballsy and, getting into somebody's space. And normally, actually, I would step back and just let it go. But I've wanted this so much all my life. I just thought I cannot let but his wife, stand in my way.
Mm,
And I'm so glad that, I stepped up and went to meet him, and I just really enjoyed the time with him, because, he's my dad, and we have so much in common, and also I can see that family trauma that he's had in his life, how it carries through, like how trauma carries through. It's just it's very weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you've had some time to settle back in at home and reflect on everything, what are your key takeaways from the experience and what are your hopes as you move forward?
I would tell people, don't wait, keep doing it. And I think, I'm 55, and a lot of people in my age group, still have parents that are alive, they're adopted parents. And I think I would tell Robin's, advice, and, a lot of people till their parents have died before they go and look for their adoptive parents. And I think you need to let adoptive parents handle their own feelings, and you need to take on your own feelings and go and search for it. It's too late, because my brother left it too late, and his birth mother died, and he's so traumatized by it, and he'll never get over it. So I think it's really important to go, because it's the missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle of my life, have now been put in place, know where I come from. And it's just made me feel really at peace, and I feel much more confident. I feel happy in. Um, it's a really nice place to be, because I've struggled that, for 55 years. Now I can get on with the rest of my life and live my life, in joy and not being somebody else's puppet or somebody else's band-aid. I can be me, and I can get out and live my life.
That's really great advice. So you've also recently shared your story again, this time for an upcoming episode of a beloved Australian television program. Can you tell us about that?
Gosh, that was the most amazing experience. And it was so incredible to be in a room of other adoptees and hearing their stories. And adoption is just so full of loss and grief and deception and lies. I just was blown away by people's stories, but also there was a lot of joy and a lot of happiness as well. And I met a lady, who's a bit younger than me, and she was part Vietnamese, and she came to Australia on a plane, when they scooped up all the babies towards the end of the war. And she was looked after in Sydney. They flew into Sydney, but her final destination was Western Australia. And she flew into Sydney, looked after by a lady who had them overnight. And this lady bathed and changed their clothes. And but she swapped the armbands for these two Vietnamese girls, and then they flew the next day to Western Australia. And these girls went to the wrong parents that they were destined to go to. And these parents realised after a little while that they actually had the wrong children. So they swapped the paperwork, and they kept the babies that they had been given. So this lady has started a charity. And so I was in Vietnam a couple of weeks ago, and this lady was on her trip to going to Vietnam, and they knew roughly the villages where they had come from. And so they were doing a bike ride through these villages with DNA testing kits, with laptops, and with interpreters, asking the mothers to come forward to be tested, because these women are an aging cohort, live in poverty, and they're trying to match up, you try to get some matches. So when I flew to Vietnam on a conference a couple of weeks ago, all these people were flying over to start their trip. It was just amazing. So I would love to hear what happened. But I really enjoyed sharing my story, because for me, getting my story out there, it's more of, because of the wise words of the detective that I had. Had she not said to me what she said to me, when she found my birth mother didn't want me. And she said to me, I know that you're sad now. But she said, there's one thing I can guarantee you. She said, people's lives are always changing. And she said, people have different chapters in their lives. And so she said, you need to grow your mother. And she said, every day things happen to people. And she said, people get divorced, people get ill, people get old, and they want to tie up loose ends. And she said, a no doesn't always stay a no. And if the detective hadn't told me that, and when she told me that your birth mother doesn't want to meet you, I would have just shut the book and that would have been it. But, she was so wise, and she said to me, I've had cases that have taken 10, 15, and 20 years to resolve themselves. So she said, I just want you to hang in there with her and send her a Christmas card every year so that she knows that you're away. And that was just so, that's why I'm so keen to share my story. Don't ever give up. There's always hope, always.
Tell us the name of the show that you've been on.
Yes, so it's on Insight on SBS. So it's the show that gives you an insight into somebody's life. So they talk about all sorts of everyday topics. So it was about adoption and DNA testing. And what was interesting was the producer had heard my podcast, and it was a very lengthy process to actually get on the show. So he initially called me and asked me if I'd like to be on it, and I said yes. And then over many weeks, we had lots of conversations. And one day he rang me and he said to me, "Can you write me the major sort of points in your story, write a bit of a framework?" Because he said, we're about to have a roundtable discussion with the other producers. And he said, it's such a big topic, adoption and DNA testing. He just said, we didn't realize how huge it was and how many people are affected by it. So I wrote him, some dot points about my story from the time I was adopted through to my reunion. To me, you'll probably have two questions that come directly to you. And can you cope with that? And I said, yes. And so I eventually got on the short list, and then I got onto the show, and I drove up to Sydney the day before the show. And I knew that he was going to call me on my way to Sydney to tell me what the questions were so that I could have a think about that. And so I had a pen and paper ready, and I ended up speaking to him for an hour on the phone, and he said, right, what we've done is we have organised the show around your adoption story, around your framework. So he said, we will ask you a question and then we'll ask the next person the same question, because all these adoption stories are very similar and I want to weave them all in together. So he said, we're going to start talking about adoption. Then the middle of the show is about DNA testing, which was fascinating. And there was a DNA specialist show as well. So hearing her, interesting. And he said, we're going to start off talking about why you were adopted and where you were adopted from and how it went for you. And then he said, at the end, we'll do the reveal about the reunion. And so everyone who was on that show had different times when they had to go into the studio so that you could meet the producers and go through hair and makeup. So I went at a certain time and went into hair and makeup, and I met this guy I'd been talking to, this producer, for weeks. And I thought, oh, he must be sort of in his 50s or 60s. I met him and he was so young. He was 25. I said to him, my God, you're the same age as one of my sons. But he was so mature and so interesting. He said, I'm going to follow you through hair and makeup. And he said, we'll go through all your questions. And I went, all my questions. And I must have had about 6 or 8 questions. And I was thinking, oh my God, I was so nervous. But he was really good in making me feel calm. And he said there'd be lots of people around you. There are about 20 people in the studio, all doing lighting and sound and all sorts of stuff. But he said, just talk to Kumi, who will ask you the questions. And he said, it'll be like having a chat with her. And there's cameras behind you, cameras next to you, cameras in front of you. And he said, even when we're to you, he said, look like you're with it, because he said we'll be panning across and looking for people's reactions. So he was really great in helping me get through the questions, and we all got into the studio. We were all mic'd up, and we were ready. And then Kumi came in, who asks the questions, and they mic'd her up and did the sound and lighting with her. And then straight away she comes over to me and she said, hi, I'm Kumi. She said, your first cab off the rank. She said, do you remember your first question? And I said, yes. And she said, I'm going to stand over here, do the introduction, all the lights will go down, and then the lights will come back up, so music will happen, and then she said, I'll walk to you, and bang, we're on. And when she was doing her introduction, my throat was so dry. I was so nervous. I thought, how am I going to get my words out? But once I started talking to her, producer was right. It was like having a conversation just with her. And also, I thought the show was filmed live, and it's not. So you made a mistake or you didn't like what you said, you could ask them to stop.
Yeah.
So it was really good. But the weird thing happened to me when I was there after the show. Um, we all our handbags and phones and everything were locked in another room. So we were walking back out room to get them, and I was out of the studio, and I could feel somebody was tugging on my arm, like someone was really pulling on my arm. And I turned around, and it was a little old lady, and she said to me, "Oh," she said, "you are so disrespectful." She said, "You are so." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "You didn't say anything about your adopted mother. You didn't, thank her for looking after you and having you."
Wow.
Um, and she just really gave me a serve. And I was like, wow. And she would have been probably in her 80s. And I thought, well, you've got a story to tell. And I said to her, let me tell you, I said, I was adopted. And I said, my mother went on to have a natural child. And I said, if she could have given us back, my brother and I said she would have. I said, it was not a good match. And it was a really hard life growing up with her. She was a scary person to have as a mother. And the lady just quiet, she said, oh, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. And she walked off. I never saw her again.
Wow.
But I just couldn't believe that somebody would think, to have to
Yeah.
put their 2 cents worth in. Yeah.
Especially after you've just been in such a vulnerable space, sharing your story, and then to come up and give you that kind of judgment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said to her, the show wasn't about my adoptive parents. It was about adoption through to reunion, and how I got to find my birth parents. It wasn't about me growing up or anything like that. But
Mm.
yeah, it was really weird. But she was just a person in the audience. She hadn't been speaking.
You handled
Mm.
it really well, Lisa.
Oh, couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after the show, we were able to go out and have in the foyer they drinks and something to eat, and that was really lovely to be able to sit and chat to other adoptees. I just loved it. I've never been with people that have got the similar, experience. It was such a joy. Never thought that I would even get to meet my parents, let alone share my story on podcasts and share it on a television program. And I hope that my journey, helps other people, because for me, hearing other people's stories, it given me a lot of insight and helped me to articulate my thoughts as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I can assure you from the feedback we've received, it's already helped quite a few people.
And that, that's what it's about. Everyone's got a story. They're all different. They're so important. And, I'm really happy to share it.
Yeah. So when can we see the show? Do you know when it's going to air?
Um, so they were saying mid-May.
Yeah.
The guy said he would text me when they're going to air it. And when when I was in there, he said, um, we didn't know when the election was going to be called. And he said, if there's an election, the show that you're on may get bumped because we'll have to put something on about the election. But now that the election is on this Saturday, on the 3rd of May, it wouldn't surprise me if mid-May that the show does go on. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, everyone needs to keep an eye out for that. I know I'll be watching. I
Yeah.
can't wait to see it.
It's going to be very weird watching myself back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's Insight on SBS, and you can watch it back on SBS as well, if it's it.
Yes,
So
it's.
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. And yeah, I don't know whether you get any feedback from it as well. I'm not sure.
I'm sure we will, because a lot of people will make the connection probably. It'll be nice for them to see your face.
Yeah. Yeah, it is nice to see people, isn't it? Yeah.
So look, thank you so much, Lisa, for coming back and sharing this next chapter in your story. If you have any further ones down the track, I know we'd love to hear about it again. And I personally just loved you keeping in touch and letting me know how things are going. It's always a big privilege for me to hear people's stories. Look, I'm getting a little teary. And I love it when they keep in touch afterwards and let me know about things that have happened. It fills my heart. So thank you so much for doing that today.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it, and it's a really cathartic thing to do, and it's a really important thing, in part of your healing journey, I think.
Yeah. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us, we would love to hear from you. So just head to the main podcast page on the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And if you want to help support the podcast, you can leave a review and share our episodes as well, just to help other people know that there are people out there who get it. And remember that Adopt Perspective can be and is listened to by people all over the world. So until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow, and bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you're calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.